The adaptation of The Last of Us kicks off in 1968 with a television broadcast. It's a discussion about what would happen if there was a pandemic. One of the epidemiologists on this panel isn't worried about bacteria or a virus. What he's worried about is fungi. He basically lays out exactly what is going to happen in 2003. That fungi take over the host, disorienting them and eventually using them as puppets. Fungi do it with animals all the time, but they haven't been able to do it with human beings because of the body temperature. Fungi can't live above 94 degrees. The epidemiologist hypothesizes that what if that were to change? What if the world were to change and all of a sudden fungi could, in fact, live inside a human body? Now, it's all conjecture, but you fast forward to 2003 and that is what's happening in Jakarta. Back over in Texas, though, Jakarta seems like a world away to Joel, his brother Tommy, and his daughter Sarah. They're not worried about Jakarta because that day is Joel's birthday, although he'd rather soon forget about it. Sarah isn't willing to let him just forget, though. Now that it's just them two, she's got to look out for her dad. Now, they hear about what's going on in Jakarta, but the severity of it isn't out there yet. They then just get ready to go about their day, with Joel and Tommy going off for work and Sarah going to school. She does get pestered by the next-door neighbors to stop on by. She kind of keeps them company, but as she's gotten older, she no longer really wants to go over there and just hang out with a bunch of elderly people. She gets guilt-tripped into doing it, though, by her dad, so later that day, she's got plans. The trip over to the neighbors, though, is going to have to wait, because after school, she heads downtown to get her dad a birthday present. Her dad has an old watch that he's really fond of, but it's broken, he never got it fixed, so she gets it fixed for him. But as the guy is fixing it in the watch shop, his wife frantically comes in and says, "We're closed. We have to close," and then she starts speaking in a foreign language. Luckily for Sarah, she's able to get the watch before the wife all but throws her out of the store, but it definitely has Sarah thinking. This store isn't supposed to close until 7 p.m., and there are a lot of police activity downtown. Either way, she has to get to the neighbors, and she does that. The couple is currently watching after one of their parents, who is very, very old. Sarah keeps the wife company by baking cookies with her, and even gets something out of it because she's able to borrow a DVD of one of her dad's favorite movies. As she's leaving, though, something really weird is going on with the family dog. It's just staring at the elderly woman. When she steps out of the house, it gets even weirder with fighter jets flying overhead. Something's going on, but she just doesn't know what it is. When Joel eventually does come home late that night, Sarah gives him his present, which he loves, and then they start watching that movie. At some point, though, Sarah dozes off, and Joel gets woken up by a phone call from his brother. Tommy got arrested, and he needs to get bailed out. Joel carries Sarah upstairs, puts her in bed, and then heads out to go get his brother. But Sarah is awoken at 2 a.m. to an explosion. She's not sure what's going on, and when she turns on the TV, there's just a national alert, issuing an emergency action notification. She then hears scratching at the door, and it's the next-door neighbor's dog. When she heads outside to see why the dog is outside, she notices that the next-door neighbor's door is wide open. She travels in, and she's horrified what she finds. The elderly couple that's next door are both dead, and it's at the hands of the elderly woman, the mother. She's been taken over, and she's currently chomping on her daughter's neck. It's absolutely terrifying. Sarah runs outside, and that's when Tommy and Joel pull up and tell her to get in the truck immediately. They need to get the hell out of there. They don't quite know where to go. They decide to go to the highway, but when they get there, they find out that everybody had that same idea. It's completely backed up. On the drive, Sarah starts questioning what's going on, if it's terrorism, if they themselves are sick, but Joel doesn't have any answers to this. They start trying to make their way out of the city any way possible, going down desolate roads, side streets, and then they get to a town's main street, and it's chaos. Complete anarchy in the streets. They start backing up the truck to go the other way, and that's when they realize that they can't go any further because there is a plane literally falling out of the sky. It crashes, explodes, and it throws their truck. Everybody's alive, but Sarah's ankle is pretty banged up. She can't really walk. Joel has to carry her. Tommy is separated from Joel and Sarah. Joel and Sarah in an alley, and Tommy's on the other side. He can't get through. He tells him to go to the river, and he'll meet him there. Joel starts to do that, carrying his daughter, while also trying to avoid the infected. That's when he's stopped by an army officer. He tells the guy, "We're not sick. We're fine. Her ankle's banged up. She needs a doctor." When the officer alerts his commander about this, the commander tells him to shoot them. Joel realizes what's going on at the last second and throws himself and Sarah down a hill. He's then saved by his brother, who shoots the Army officer in the head. But it's not without casualty. Sarah is hit, and she's mortally wounded. Unfortunately for the two, there's nothing they can do about it. We fast forward 20 years later to present day, where Joel has made his way to Boston. And Boston does not look like the Boston you and I know. It looks like a mix between a refugee camp and a war zone. Boston's governing body is run by something called Fedra. It's basically the presiding government. They set up a quarantine zone with walls, a curfew, odd jobs like burning bodies and sanitation. It's definitely not the best life, especially if you knew the old life. But just like with every government, there's a resistance. These people are called the Fireflies. They've been going at Fedra for years, ever since the quarantine zone was set up, really. It's an underground army-type group of civilians that don't like the dictatorship. Joel isn't a part of them. Tommy, though, is. And his involvement with the Fireflies has put a strife between the two. Joel seems like he just wants to be a normal civilian. That doesn't mean he doesn't have an odd job. He pushes pills. One of his best customers is a Fedra officer. While everybody is focused on an execution that day, Joel sneaks off into an alley with this officer and makes a deal. As the officer is putting the pills in his pocket, Joel asks him about an update on a vehicle. The officer's helping Joel get a vehicle, but the officer does warn him that vehicles are crappy. They're available for a reason, and they don't have a battery. Joel knows all that. He's okay with it. He just wants a vehicle. Right before the two part ways, the officer gives him some advice. Stay off the streets tonight. Fireflies have been blowing stuff up all week. The boss has us working doubles, and it's really easy to confuse a civilian with a Firefly. The next stop Joel goes to is the radio tower. It's a very popular place. It's really the only place where people in Boston can communicate with the outside world and loved ones. Joel's looking for an update because he put a radio signal out to Tommy, but he hasn't heard back. It's been 3 weeks, and it's never taken Tommy more than a day to respond. Joel's not willing just to let the radio technician tell him, yeah, I'm sure Tommy's okay. No, he wants to go after Tommy. He pulls out a map and makes the radio technician show him exactly where to go, and Tommy would be located in Wyoming. The radio tech tries to talk him out of this. While the quarantine zone sucks, it is the safest spot. In the outside world, you've got raiders, slavers, and on top of it, you've got the infected. All of that seems like a really good reason as to why Joel should go after his brother. After he gets the location, he heads home and he sleeps. He's woken up in the middle of the night by his roommate / girlfriend / best friend, whatever they are, but her name's Tess. She has had quite a day. Joel and Tess had made a deal with a local scumbag to secure a car battery, but that guy screwed him over. He took their money and he sold the battery to somebody else. He kept Tess locked up in a basement because he was worried about the repercussions when Joel found out. Tess was able to escape when a Firefly truck exploded right outside of the building. It was pretty jarring for Tess, and then she walked out into the street into a firefight where she was arrested for suspicion of being a Firefly member. They finally let her go in the middle of the night when they realized she isn't a part of that group. When Joel wakes up the next morning and he sees Tess's face, he's pretty concerned when Tess fills him in on everything that happened. The fact the car battery was sold to somebody else is not the news that Joel wanted. Especially with not hearing from Tommy, he needs that car battery to get to him. Tess realizes that Joel is extremely angry at the moment, so she tries to calm him down. She reassures him that they'll find out who this guy sold the battery to, but they'll do it in a quiet manner. Tess and Joel head out in the streets. They start asking around, and it doesn't take too long to figure out where this guy is headed with their battery. They figure they can take the subway tunnel and sneak up in the building and catch him by surprise. While Joel and Tess go after their battery, not too far away in a building is Firefly HQ. Firefly Boston chapter is led by a woman named Marlene. And currently, she has a teenage girl locked up in a room. And no one can quite figure out why. Every day somebody comes in and gives this girl a bunch of questions, make sure she's okay, but then they don't let her leave. And this girl has a whole lot of attitude. She tells them that her name is Veronica, but that's not true. Her name's actually Ellie. And Marlene has big plans for Ellie. She's been using the Fireflies to set off explosions all over the city away from their home base. That night, every one of the Fireflies is going to gather and leave the quarantine zone, taking Ellie west. Ellie, though, has no idea this is happening. She's confused as to why she's changed up, and Marlene sits down and has a talk with her. Ellie pleads with Marlene to let her go, saying, "I'm not going to tell anybody about this operation." And Marlene looks at her and says, "What, you're that desperate to get back to a Fedra school?" But no, Ellie isn't. She reminds Marlene that she had no choice but to go to that school. It's a school for orphans. Fedra put her there. And Marlene says, "No, Fedra didn't put you there. I did, Ellie." When Marlene uses Ellie's real name, that's when Ellie knows that Marlene's legit. Ellie is confused as to why the Fireflies would stick her with Fedra. I mean, they are the Fireflies' enemy after all. And Marlene explains that that's where she was safest. And up until a few weeks ago, that was true. She was safe. Till she left the school, venturing out. Ellie still doesn't understand, though, why Marlene won't let her go. And Marlene tells her it's because you have a greater purpose. We're leaving tonight with you. She then tells Ellie what that purpose is, but warns her that Ellie can't tell anybody about this. If she does, it could cost her her life. And we, as the audience, aren't privy to that information. There's then a knock at the door, and Marlene finds out that her car battery has arrived, although the deal goes sideways quick. The battery wasn't good. This caused the two sides to start shooting at each other, and Marlene ended up getting hit. As she's getting patched up, they get some unexpected visitors. Joel and Tess. Both sides are very shocked to see the other. While Tess and Joel aren't a part of the Fireflies, they know Marlene. They don't have a bad relationship with her. When Joel and Tess show up, Ellie pops out of a door and attacks them. She doesn't know that Marlene knows these two. They start talking about how they both were in the market for that battery. Joel gets a little chippy when Marlene brings up Tommy's name because he blames Marlene for driving a stake between the two. But it's Marlene's second in command that points out that gunfire is going to bring Fedra agents to their doorstep. They got to get a move on. Marlene looks at both Joel and Tess and explains that they were planning on moving Ellie out of the quarantine zone that night, but she's not getting anywhere. She's dealing with a bullet wound. So she's come up with the idea in that moment that Joel and Tess can do it. Joel is completely against it. He tells Marlene, "We don't smuggle people." But Marlene continues anyway, telling them that there's a team of Fireflies waiting for them at the old state house. If they get her there safely, those Fireflies will give them what they need. And we're talking a fueled-up truck, guns, anything. Joel and Tess are pretty suspicious, and they do ask her, "What's so important about this girl?" But Marlene just tells them, "She's cargo to you." After a quick discussion on the matter, Joel and Tess agree to take Ellie with them. They need the truck. It's as simple as that. Ellie, though, really doesn't want to go, but Ellie really doesn't have a choice. Joel takes Ellie back to his apartment. They gotta wait till nightfall to get out of the quarantine zone. Ellie's pretty smart. She's able to figure out a radio code really quickly. They play songs over the radio to tell people what's needed. If it's a 60s song, that means there's nothing in. If it's a song from the 70s, it means there's new stuff in. And if it's 80s, well, that just has an X on it. But she's able to weasel out of Joel that 80s means trouble. Later that night, the group heads out when it's dark. Using a series of secret tunnels, they're almost out of the quarantine zone when they're caught by a Fedra agent. But it happens to be that Fedra agent that Joel sells pills to. Unfortunately, the agent's not willing to let Joel slide. He's actually pissed off that Joel didn't heed his warning about staying off the streets. He's ready to call it in. They offer this guy whatever he wants, but he doesn't take any of it. And with a gun pointed at Joel and a teenage daughter by his side, he gets flashbacks of what happened between him and Sarah, and he takes matters into his own hands, bum-rushing this guy and beating the ever-loving crap out of him. The device, though, that soldier uses to see if people are sick was sitting right next to Ellie, and it's red. Tess starts freaking out, showing Joel the discovery, but Ellie starts saying, "No, I'm not sick, guys. I swear." She then shows them a bite mark on her arm, saying, "This was from 2 weeks ago. Look at me, I'm fine." They don't have a long time to discuss it, though, because Fedra is on their ass, and they have to get the hell out of the quarantine zone. In episode 2, you get a look at day 1 in Jakarta. It was a normal day. That is, as far as the public was concerned. As a woman named Ibu Ratna is eating lunch, the military comes and picks her up. She thinks she's committed a crime, but it's actually the exact opposite. They need her. That's because Ibu Ratna is a professor in mycology, and she's the best that Jakarta has. They arrive at a hospital and they quickly rush her in to take a look at something. They have it under a microscope, and as soon as Ibu looks at it, she knows that it's something called Ophiocordyceps. What she can't figure out is why they use chlorazole to prepare the slide. Chlorazole is only used when it's taken from a human, and cordyceps wouldn't be living in a human. But the military officer lets her know that this was taken from a human. She thinks there's been some mistake because cordyceps couldn't possibly live in humans, and that's when they take her to the body. They put her in a hazmat suit and they tell her to quickly get out of there if anything goes wrong. And she thinks there's no way anything's going to go wrong. It's a dead body. And as far as Ibu can see, it is in fact a dead body until she opens up the mouth. That's when Ibu gets horrified because there is living fungi growing out of it. When she's able to collect herself and sit down, the military officer tells her that all of this happened about 30 hours ago in a grain factory. That's when a normal woman got suddenly violent. She attacked 4 coworkers, she bit 3 of them, and that's when her coworkers locked her up in the bathroom and waited for the police to come. But when they did, she attacked them as well. They had no choice, they had to shoot her. Ibu asks what happened to the people that she bit, and the officer says they were taken into observation. Although a few hours later, it became necessary to execute them as well. The real question that Ibu has is who bit the first person? And to that, they have no idea. The second question she has is anyone missing? And he tells her yes, 14 people. That's when Ibu gets extremely fidgety. He tells her that they brought her here because they need medicine, they need a vaccine, they need something to keep this thing from spreading. And she very sternly looks at him and says, there is no medicine. There is no vaccine. That's when he gets very scared and asks, well, then what do we do? And she very seriously says, bomb. Bomb the city and everyone in it. She then realizes what she said, the severity of it, and she starts crying, asking the military officer to drive her home so she can just be with her family in this time. Fast forward to present day, where Ellie, Joel, and Tess have made it out of the quarantine zone and made it to an abandoned building. But they have questions for Ellie. Mainly, how the hell is it that she got bit, and she's saying it was weeks ago and she's survived up until this point. They also want to know what the hell Marlene was doing with an infected kid. Ellie quickly snaps, I'm not infected. Marlene found me after I was bitten. She chained me up in a room, and every day they would give me a test to see that I wasn't getting more sick. Ellie then gets up and proclaims to the room that she has to pee, so she goes to a corner and starts doing it, and that gives Tess and Joel a little bit of time to talk about what they're going to do with her. While it doesn't make any sense, Tess does point out she made it through the night. She seems fine. But Joel doesn't want to take that risk. He wants to sneak her back into the QZ and find another way to get this car battery. Tess, however, doesn't want to do that. She knows that this is the easiest way to get the car battery, but also, if they bring her back to the QZ, someone's going to scan her, find out that she's, quote, infected, and kill her. And Joel doesn't care. He says, better them than us. He's so callous that he even says, we got to stop talking about this kid like she's got some kind of life in front of her. That's when Ellie walks back and interrupts the conversation, putting a halt to it. Tess then asks Ellie, why are you so important to Marlene? And don't lie to me or we'll take you back. But to their surprise, Ellie says, well, if you take me back, you don't get your battery. Yeah, she heard the whole conversation. Tess doesn't flinch, just saying, well, then I guess you heard that he wants to shoot you. So answer my question. And that's when Ellie reveals what Marlene told her, why she's so important. It's because they think she's immune. There's a Firefly base camp out west, and they're working on a cure. And getting her to that base camp could be key to finding a vaccine. While Joel is hesitant to believe any of this, Tess pushes him to just finish the job, get their battery, and get on their way. They then start making their way through a mangled Boston. But Boston isn't just destroyed because of the infected. It's destroyed because they bombed major cities. Tess tells Ellie that they had to slow the spread somehow, so bombing the major cities was the best option they had. But now it looks like a war zone. While it seemed to work in Boston, that strategy did not seem to work in most places, because infected still roam. As they continue to walk, what Ellie can't figure out is where all the infected are. She can't hear them. And Tess tells her, oh, don't worry, you'll hear them. But Ellie's worried because she didn't hear them last time. She then tells Tess that the place she got bit was an old mall. Tess is shocked because that mall is supposed to be closed off to everybody. She asks Ellie, how old are you? And Ellie tells her she's 14. To which Tess responds, man, you got some balls on you. Tess then asks Ellie if anyone's going to be coming after them, if they should expect any surprises, and Ellie says no. I'm an orphan. They then hear in the distance some infected scream, and that's when Ellie knows that yes, they still are out there. After a little bit of walking, they make their way to an abandoned hotel that used to be pretty damn nice, but now it's flooded and disgusting, although Ellie's amazed by it. They're not staying at the hotel, though. They want to use it just to see if the pathway that they're going to take is clear. They find an area, though, they can't get into, and Tess is forced to try to find a way in. That leaves both Joel and Ellie to bond, although every question that Joel has for Ellie, she gives a smart-ass answer to. Ellie does have her own questions, though, like, where are Joel and Tess from? And Joel tells her, I'm from Texas, and Tess is from Detroit. Although that is the only question that Joel answers. He doesn't answer how he got to Boston. He doesn't answer if him and Tess are an item. Ellie decides to change the topic from Joel's personal life to the infected, asking how long they usually last. And Joel tells her it really depends. Some last a month. Some have been walking around for 20 years. Ellie then asks him if he's killed any, and he says, yeah, lots of them. Joel is very relieved when the questions stop because Tess has found a way in. It looks like it's the entrance to the old hotel pool, but Tess wants to show Ellie something. Because when you go to the balcony and you look down, there's just a swarm of dead bodies. Tess explains that the last time they came through, they were still inside, but people probably came through looking for the quarantine zone, went in, got bit, and then forced their way out. And that's how they get more and more every year. The sun then suddenly shines on a group of them, and they all move in unison. And Ellie points out that they're connected. And Tess says, yeah, more than you know. The fungus also grows underground. If you step on a group of cordyceps in one place, you could wake up a dozen somewhere else. Then they know where you are, and then they all come. She reminds Ellie, you're not immune from being ripped apart. Unfortunately for them, the group with all the bodies, that was where they were going to go. So now they need to go to their contingency plan. That's going to be going through a museum. They make their way in, and they don't run into any infected on the first floor, although it is covered with fungus. They then slowly make their way to the top, and they do hear the screams of somebody who is infected. Suddenly, they're dangerously close to this thing. To make it worse, it's a clicker. Joel tells both Ellie and Tess to be quiet. Doesn't matter how quiet they are, though, the clicker walks by, senses their presence, and screams. The first one goes after Joel, and the second one rushes at Tess. Although she shoots it dead, and then her and Ellie flee for their lives. The more they run, the more noise they make. At this point, Joel has been able to get rid of the first clicker, but it seems like they're just multiplying. It gets so bad that one of them jumps on both Joel and Ellie. And Joel is somehow able to keep this thing from biting both of them. The final one is taken out by Tess, and then they check themselves. Ellie was bit, but as Ellie points out, if it was going to happen to any of them, it might as well be her, right? They then start making their way to the meeting location with the fireflies, but Tess suddenly seems like she's in a bad mood, and she seems a little banged up. A couple hours later, they get to the location where they're supposed to meet the fireflies. It's the Capitol building, but nobody's there, and they're pretty concerned. Especially when they start gingerly looking around and it looks like there was a slaughter. Like the fireflies were ambushed by something and torn apart. And Joel, Tess, even Ellie have a pretty good idea of what it might have been. Ellie notices, though, that whatever it was went inside because there's a fresh trail of blood. And not even thinking, Tess escorts Ellie in. She seems to be in a rush. When they get inside, everybody's dead. By looking at the bodies, Joel can tell that one of them got bit, the healthy ones fought the sick ones, everybody lost. The fact that this hasn't gone as planned has Tess's anxiety at an all-time high. And finally, Joel says, Tess, it's over. We're going home. And Tess snaps at him. When she calms down, she tells him, I'm staying. And then she reveals why. Because in that skirmish, Tess got bit. She walks over to Ellie, grabs her arm, shows Ellie's bite, the fresh one, and her bite. And one looks drastically worse, and it's hers. She tells Joel, this is real. I need you to get her to Bill and Frank's. You can hand her off. The whole time, Joel is just saying no, but Tess snaps him out of it by saying, you have to. I've never asked you for anything, but I'm asking you now. This is your chance to get her there. Keep her alive, set everything right. One of the dead people starts to come to life, and Joel shoots it. But just like Tess said earlier, sometimes you step on cordyceps, and a mile away, the infected feel it. That's what happens. Joel notices that the ground is moving. He knows that he doesn't have a lot of time before they're swarmed by the infected. And while he doesn't want to leave Tess behind, she doesn't give him a choice. She's going to sacrifice herself, telling Joel to get Ellie out of there. With time running out, Joel follows the order. Him and Ellie exit out the back, and the infected rush in. Tess dumps a bunch of gasoline on the ground, but it's not as easy as simply lighting a match. Her lighter won't work. The worst part of this whole thing is the fact that Tess's last moments on Earth are making out with an infected as she's trying to get her lighter working. It's pretty damn gross. Nobody deserves that kind of ending, but a few clicks, the lighter works, and the whole building explodes with a bunch of infected dying. Ellie and Joel just continue to head off, out west. In episode 3, Joel and Ellie are 10 miles west of Boston. Joel is still processing the loss of Tess, and he's taking it out on Ellie a little bit. Ellie will try to make small talk. Joel just doesn't even answer. Finally, it gets to the point where Ellie yells at him and says, "Nobody made you do this. You made a choice in this, so don't blame me for something that isn't my fault." While Joel doesn't acknowledge it, he knows that she's right. They then continue to make the 5-mile hike to Bill and Frank's. 5 miles is a lot of time to kill, and Ellie starts quizzing Joel, question after question. Like, for example, Joel has a scar on his head, and Ellie asks what it was from, and he says, "Someone shot at me and missed." Every single answer that Joel gives is with a tone that says, "Please stop asking me more questions." But Ellie doesn't really pick up on this, or she just doesn't care. They stop off at a rundown gas station that Joel has visited in the past. He's got some stuff stashed there that he has to pick up. It's been a couple of years since Joel has been here, though, so he kind of forgets about where he stashed the stuff. This gives Ellie a little bit of free time to look around and see if she can find anything. She goes into a back room and she finds an opening to the basement of the building. She does find one thing of use: tampons. That'll help. But then she hears an infected scream. The good news is the infected is trapped under rubble, but it's still alive. Ellie gets super close to it, examining it, cutting its forehead a little bit, and then finally killing it. Ellie returns to the top, and it's time to go. On the journey, Joel is reminded just how young Ellie is. They come across a plane crash, and Ellie is just fascinated by the idea of planes. She's blown away that Joel actually flew in one at one point, because ever since she's known the world, planes weren't a thing. Because of this sparks a conversation about how the Cordyceps outbreak even started. Ellie brings up a good question. If you have to be bit to be infected, who bit the first person? And to that, Joel doesn't have an answer. But he does tell her the theory out there that Cordyceps mutated, it got into the food supply like grain, and it got sent all over the world. Within a week, people that have eaten that grain get infected, it spreads, and thus you've got what they're living in now. A couple hours later, they arrive at Bill and Frank's, and Bill and Frank have an interesting backstory. Bill was a prepper, so when the Cordyceps virus hit, they were escorting people out of the neighborhood to a safe quarantine zone, but Bill wasn't going to go. He ended up hunkering down, avoiding the military transport, and just staying there. And nobody knew because nobody was around. He had prepared his entire life for this, but he still went around town collecting extra supplies just to make sure that he was ready for the long haul. He even went so far as to set up a fence around the town so he would be safe and secure. At this point, he was the only person living in this town, but he was completely self-sufficient. Water, electricity, food, everything, and it was all protected by an electric fence that he set up. But while he had planned for all of this, what Bill didn't plan for was Frank. Frank fell into one of his trapped holes. Bill approached Frank at gunpoint, suspicious of who he was, but it became clear pretty quickly that Frank was really no threat. Frank told Bill that he was trying to find the Boston quarantine zone. He had come from the Baltimore quarantine zone, but that thing fell. Even though he was suspicious, Bill let Frank up out of the hole. He gave him directions on how to get to Boston, but Frank started asking for food. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. He was starving. Bill knew that if he gave Frank food, he might have to deal with more people coming, but Frank was pretty persuasive, and Bill hadn't talked to anybody in a long time, so he let him in the house. He lets Frank shower. He gives him food. He even gives him wine. Slowly, Frank starts to chisel away at Bill's rough exterior. Frank did have plans on leaving, but he didn't. He ends up staying. And Bill and Frank end up hooking up. It was the first time that Bill had ever been with a man before, but he slowly fell in love with Frank. The two were complete polar opposites, but they were the only people left in their little community. Bill was okay with this. He was fine living alone with Frank. In fact, he didn't want to be with anybody else. He didn't want to know anybody else. He didn't want to talk to anybody else. He was fine being a recluse. That wasn't Frank, though. Frank needed other people. He wanted other people. He didn't see the inherent evil in others like Bill did. Bill always assumed the worst, but Frank always assumed the best. So eventually, Frank decided, you know what, screw this. I'm going to use that radio in the corner, and I'm going to start talking to people on the outside. That's how he found Tess. The first meeting between Bill and Tess and Frank was very awkward. Tess ended up bringing Joel along with her, and while they didn't like each other, Joel and Bill were pretty similar. They both assumed that the other party was up to no good, even though they weren't. They were just there to have a meal, like the old times. But as the years went on, they developed a friendship, sort of a frenemy situation. Bill never got to the point where he actually did like Joel, but he did get to the point where he respected him and appreciated him, and he used him to trade for things like medicine, supplies that maybe he didn't have. The relationship became pretty useful. This wasn't to say that throughout the years they didn't have their fair share of unwanted guests. While Fedra never visited them, raiders did. Bill had done a really, really good job of keeping the area fortified, with an electric fence, traps, and all that, but it still kept people coming. He had to fight them off. One such instance, he ended up getting shot, and it looked really, really bad. Bill thought he was on his deathbed and even told Frank, call Joel, he'll take care of you. But there was no need, because Bill ended up making a full recovery. Unfortunately, a few years later, the Big C ended up getting Frank. Bill tried to be positive about it, making it seem like Frank could overcome it, but finally, Frank got tired of listening to Bill and said, Bill, this thing was incurable when the world was fine. The idea that they cured cancer? Now? Come on, man. One morning, Frank woke up and he decided, this is it. This could be my last day on Earth. I can't live like this anymore. Bill tried to talk him out of it, but it didn't work. Instead, he decided to spend the last remaining day with Frank, doing everything Frank loved to do. It was tough. It was emotional. And towards dinner, Bill decided to make a decision himself. The plan was to crush a bunch of pills up into Frank's drink. Frank drinks it, and he falls asleep and dies. But Bill wasn't going to let Frank die alone. After both of them drink the spiked wine, Bill revealed his plan to Frank. He tells him this isn't the tragic suicide at the end of the play. I'm old. I'm satisfied with my life. And you were my purpose. They both went upstairs a short while later and passed away. A few months later, Joel and Ellie show up. As Joel is looking all over for Bill or Frank, Ellie finds the note. The letter was basically addressed to Joel, because as the letter states, he's the only one who would have made it inside unharmed. Bill gives Joel the bunker code that has all of the ammunition and anything he might need and says, take it. He also ends the note by saying, I never really liked you, but still, it's like we're friends, and I respect you. So I'm going to tell you something that probably you will be the only person to understand. I used to hate the world, and I was happy when everybody died. But I was wrong. There was one person worth saving. And that's what I did. I saved him, and I protected him. And that's why men like you and me are here. We have a job to do, and God help anyone who stands in our way. That's why I'm leaving you everything. My guns, my equipment. Use them to keep Tess safe. While Joel knows that it's too late for that, he knows that he can keep Ellie safe. He also knows that now he found a truck with a battery. That's because Bill had a truck and he left him the key, although he does have to build the battery. As the battery is charging, Joel walks back inside and has Ellie show him her arm. While it does look like it was bitten, it doesn't look like it's affecting her at all. With the confirmation that Ellie is in fact immune, Joel tells her that he has a brother in Wyoming. He's heading out there to find him, and he'll take her along. He used to be a Firefly, so Joel's best guess is he'll at least know where some of them are out west. He does put down a series of rules. The first one is, don't bring up Tess, ever. The second one is, don't tell anybody about the immunity, the bite, none of it. The third rule is, do what he says when he says it. They then go through the house, stocking up, taking a shower, getting new clothes. Ellie does find a gun, which she pockets, doesn't tell Joel about it. And a little while later, both of them are on their way out west. In episode 4, Joel and Ellie continue to head out west. They have to stop about every hour to siphon gas. And when it comes time to sleep, they have to hide out in the woods. It's not all bad. Thanks to Bill and Frank's stash, they have a bunch of 20-year-old Chef Boyardee items. As they continue on, Joel is teaching Ellie how to stay safe. Like, for example, don't start a fire because raiders will end up seeing the smoke and end up heading towards your way. You don't want that. It's frustrating to Joel that he has to tell her what he thinks is pretty much common sense, but she is starting to crack into that hard shell exterior. She's got this book full of puns, and they're so bad, but the way that she tells them, they're actually pretty funny. Even though Joel doesn't want to laugh, some of them he has to. When they wake up the next morning, they're all well rested, and they continue to head out west. With any luck, they can reach Wyoming in about 2 days. You've got Joel driving, Ellie being the navigator. With all this free time, they have a lot of time to discuss things, like Joel's brother Tommy. Ellie wants to know why they split up, why they aren't together. And Joel reluctantly tells her that Tommy's what they call a joiner. He would dream of becoming a hero, so he enlisted in the Army back in the day. He enlisted in the Fireflies, thinking he could make a difference. When Tommy joined the Fireflies and made their way up to Boston, Joel followed suit. He didn't want to be a Firefly, he just wanted to keep an eye on his brother. In Boston, that's where they met Tess, but that's also where Tommy met Marlene. Joel shakes his head because the way that he looks at it, his brother didn't learn from the same mistake that he made when he was 18 and joined the Army. Although last Joel heard, Tommy had quit the Fireflies, so he's really concerned because his brother is all alone out there. A few hours later, Joel and Ellie are just outside of Kansas City. They're trying to go through a tunnel, but the tunnel is blocked, and they get rerouted. Joel thinks he knows a shortcut, but it's going to force him to go through the actual city. Unfortunately, Ellie isn't that good at being a navigator. And even though they don't see anybody in the city, on the city streets, or any sign of any infected, they also have no idea how to get back on the highway. That's when things get really scary, because they do notice the quarantine zone, and Fedra is nowhere to be found. They then hear a guy scream for help, and Joel knows it's a trap. He tries to drive away, but the truck gets stopped by spike strips, and it forces Joel and Ellie to get out of the car, and suddenly they're in a firefight. Joel tries to take care of Ellie, telling her to go hide somewhere, as he tries to take care of whoever these people are. Joel does a pretty good job. He's still got it in terms of his shooting accuracy. But one of the younger guys sneaks up on him, grabs him, throwing him to the ground and choking him. It's Ellie who actually comes to his rescue. She crawls out of that nook, pulls the gun that she was hiding out of her bag, and shoots this guy in the back. She doesn't kill him, but this guy is really badly injured, and he starts begging for mercy. In a last-ditch effort, this kid, who's named Brian, starts trying to make friends with Joel and Ellie. It doesn't work. Joel sends Ellie to hide once again, and he kills Brian. Now, though, they're stuck. Their car has flat tires. They obviously can't change them because the gunshots drew attention to them, and they have to start hiding throughout the city. They have limited resources because they had to take whatever they could grab from the truck, which wasn't much, and they figure their best bet is to hide in some of the buildings till nightfall and then sneak out. They're unaware that they have a much bigger issue to deal with, because the person who's now in charge of Kansas City is named Kathleen. She was in charge of the resistance, and she is out for blood. She's hunting for a guy named Henry, who betrayed her brother. And Henry has his little brother Sam with him. Her and her brother were really close, so this betrayal really hit home. She's extremely cutthroat. She will do whatever it takes to find this guy. That means killing whoever she has to locate Sam. Sam is living rent-free in Kathleen's head, to the point where when her second-in-command brings her the body of Brian and she says who did this, and he says outsiders, she immediately thinks, no, Henry had to play a part in this somehow. Maybe he got on a radio and called these guys in. Kathleen was already really pissed off to begin with, and now that she thinks that Henry is calling in mercenaries to kill her people, that pisses her off even more. She proclaims to her group, this is Henry's work. Do you understand? He's not going to stop until we stop him. Find who did this. Find every single collaborator and kill them all. Kathleen's people go to work. They file into their cars and they start going door to door looking for Joel and Ellie. Of course, Joel and Ellie, they have no idea that these people are actually hunting them, or at least how many are hunting them. They're hunkered down in an abandoned building and they're honestly wondering who these people are. They know they're not Fedra, they know they're not Fireflies, but they're more terrifying than that because they're just people. Joel knows it's just a matter of time before they move on from the apartment buildings to just the storefronts, which is where they're currently hiding at the moment. They've scoped out a really tall building, and they figure that as soon as they don't hear a truck, they're going to move to that building. While they wait for the all clear, Ellie asks Joel, are you all right? And he says, yeah, I'm all right. Are you all right? And she says, yeah, I'm fine. It's pretty clear they're both shaken up by the events, though. Ellie's shaken up because she shot someone. Joel is shaken up because he needed Ellie's help. And he's never needed help like that before. He's realizing he's losing a step. He tries to apologize for putting Ellie in that situation in the first place, but he really sucks at apologies. He knows what it's like to hurt somebody for the first time. But Ellie tells him, that wasn't my first time. With that in mind, Joel pulls out a gun and starts showing her how to hold it, how to aim, what to do, all of it. They then notice that they don't hear trucks, so they head for that tall building. And they are doing a good job of evading Kathleen and her men. Kathleen is simultaneously looking for Joel and Ellie, but also looking for Henry. She realizes that she's close to finding out where Henry is and smoking him out. She finds one of his hiding places, and by the looks of it, Henry has run out of food, and he's not going to let his little brother Sam starve. She knows that Henry's close. By the looks of it, her second in command, Perry, he's not even thinking about Henry. Kathleen can tell, so she asks, what is it? And he shows her. He takes her into another room where the ground seems to have caved in. It kind of looks like a wrecking ball fell, and the floor is cracked, but it's also moving. It's pretty concerning and pretty terrifying, and it leads Kathleen and Perry to get the hell out of that building. Perry wants to deal with it right then and there, but Kathleen says no, we'll deal with it after we find Henry. Just seal off the building. They continue on their routes, looking for Henry, looking for Sam, looking for Joel and Ellie. But when nightfall hits, they haven't found anybody. That's because Joel and Ellie are on like the 30th floor of this building just hiding out. Joel and Ellie find a room to sleep in. Joel puts some glass on the floor so that if anybody does come in, they won't be sneaking up on them. And then they try to go to bed. There is one thing, though, that is eating at Joel. It's the fact that Ellie said that wasn't her first time hurting somebody. And he asks about it, but she says, I don't really want to talk about it. She then asks him if he's even going to be able to hear the glass because she's noticed that he's not so good at hearing out of his right ear. He tells her that it's probably from shooting a gun so much, so if she wants to keep her hearing, stick to a knife. They then change the subject to some funny puns, and eventually they fall asleep, but they're woken up in the middle of the night. Well, at least Ellie is. That glass didn't work. Joel's right ear betrayed him. He's awoken up by Ellie, who says his name, and when he looks up, he's got a little boy pointing a gun directly in his face. And Ellie is standing with her arms up at gunpoint from an adult who's holding her hostage. In episode 5, we know that the two people holding Joel and Ellie hostage are indeed Henry and Sam. Ever since the quarantine zone fell, Henry and Sam have been on the move. They knew that Kathleen would be after them. While many people were happy that Kathleen was in charge, Henry and Sam were not. One by one, Kathleen started killing contributors. They were basically the people that would rat out the resistance to Fedra. But the one contributor she wanted more than anybody was Henry, because of what he did to her brother. Finding Henry had become her number one priority. Henry and Sam relied on friends to keep them safe until they could escape Kansas City. The best advice that Henry got in all of this was the fact that Sam was scared because he could see that Henry was scared. The fact is, Henry was scared. He was being hunted by an entire city. And after 10 days, Henry and Sam had to move because they had run out of food, and their connection to the outside world hadn't returned. Kathleen had gotten that guy and killed him. Henry did his best to heed the advice and make Sam feel comfortable while trying to convince him that everything would indeed be okay, but it was a lot easier said than done. They were actually on the move when they heard Joel's truck crash into the laundromat, and the firefight broke out. That night, they were able to sneak up on Joel and Ellie sleeping and catch them off guard. While they're the ones holding the gun, it's obvious to everybody in the room that it is not a comfortable situation. Henry doesn't really know what to do, what to say in the situation. He wants everybody to be cool about it, but he also has to defend himself in case Joel does attack him. And Joel's tone of voice isn't really putting Henry's mind at ease, but eventually he does lower the weapons and everybody just kind of chills out. He introduces himself to Joel and Ellie. He introduces his brother Sam as well, and he explains that he is the most wanted man in Kansas City, but he's pretty sure that they're number 2. Now that Joel and Ellie realize that they're friendly, they decide to share some food with Henry and Sam. Joel isn't really looking to be friendly with these people, though, but Henry is looking for a partnership. He saw the way that Joel handled himself with that gun, and he knows that he needs Joel to stay alive to get out of the city. But he also knows that Joel is going to need him to get out of the city as well. He knows how to get out, he just knows that it's too dangerous for him and Sam. They need somebody of Joel's ilk. When they wake up the next morning, Henry explains to Joel how Fedra fell. Kansas City Fedra was the worst of the worst. Got to the point where when people had a chance, they overthrew the government. Just by looking at him, Joel knows that Henry isn't Fedra, and Henry says, "You're right about that. I'm way worse. I'm a contributor." And Joel doesn't want to work with rats, but Henry says, "Well, if you want to get out alive, you will." Henry then grabs a piece of paper and starts breaking out his escape route. Kathleen has people posted surrounding the perimeter. If they get close to the highway, they're going to get caught. The only safe way to get across is to go underneath. There's a tunnel. So they're going to enter the tunnel in a bank building, travel underground, and pop up in a residential area. Head down an embankment, over the river. They're home free. There's one catch, though. Fedra drove the infected underground 15 years ago. So those tunnels should be full of infected, but the thing is, Henry knows they're not. The Fedra guy that he used to work with told him that they cleared out those tunnels 3 years ago. Even Kathleen thinks that it's overrun with infected, so they're not going to have trouble running into anybody down there. Joel is a little skeptical. So is Ellie. I mean, what happens if you run into one or two? And Ellie says, yeah, what happens if we run into one of those that looks like a blind bat? And Henry says, wait, you ran into a clicker? And you're still alive? This is a prime reason why we need you. Henry realizes that it is a dicey plan, but he also knows that it is worth a shot. It's the only plan they've got. Joel doesn't want to admit it, but Henry's right. So, a couple hours later, they head off to the bank, find the tunnel, and enter it. And sure enough, it is empty, at least to start. The deeper they go, though, it is empty. Until eventually they come across a room that looks like it's a children's daycare. It's completely abandoned, and there's actually stuff to do there, so they decide to wait out until nightfall. As Ellie and Sam play, Henry and Joel get to know each other better. Joel apologizes to Henry, saying, hey, if you were collaborating to take care of Sam, I'm sorry. I didn't know your situation. And that's exactly what it was. Henry tells his whole backstory. Henry was friends with the leader of the resistance movement. It was Kathleen's brother. Henry had a lot of respect for this guy. He was truly a great man. But Sam got sick. He had leukemia, and there was only one drug that could work, and Fedra had it. In order to get it from Fedra, Henry had to give them something big, so he did. He gave them Kathleen's brother, which ultimately led to Kathleen's brother dying. This has always really bothered Henry. He didn't want to give up Kathleen's brother, but he also knew that he needed to keep Sam healthy. While he gets depressed talking about this, it does cheer him up to see Sam so happy. Sam playing with Ellie has finally put a smile on the kid's face, something that Henry hasn't seen in a long time. But when Joel proclaims it's time to go, it's time to go. A little while later, they get to the end of the tunnel, they get to the residential area, it's nighttime, and no one's there. It looks like this plan has worked. As they walk through the residential area over to the bridge, somebody shoots at them, and they have no idea where it's coming from. It came from a sniper rifle, they know that, and as they hide behind a car, they figure out that it's coming from a house. It's a lone shooter. Lucky for them, whoever it is has a horrible shot. Joel takes it upon himself to take care of this guy. In the darkness, he sneaks around the back of this guy's house, breaks in, goes upstairs, and there he is, an old man. Joel feels bad for him and tells him, just put the gun down, slide it over to me, and stay up here for another hour. That's all you have to do. He can see in the old man's eyes that he's considering trying to shoot at Joel, and Joel begs him not to do it. And when the guy makes a move, Joel has no choice but to shoot him. As Joel goes to signal to the group that everything's okay, he hears Kathleen on a radio. That old man was working with Kathleen. And before he started shooting, he radioed to her that there were 4 people outside walking in the street. So Kathleen's on her way. Joel doesn't even have enough time to warn the group. It's Kathleen's men and her trucks that warn the group to their arrival. As Henry, Sam, and Ellie flee from the streets trying not to get run over, Joel grabs the old man's sniper rifle and starts shooting. And he is able to shoot the driver of the truck that is clearing the path for everybody else. That truck drives right into a house, and it's one less thing they have to worry about, but that's one driver when there's about 10 of them. Everybody, though, gets distracted when that truck that crashed into the house explodes into flames. It gives Henry a chance to grab Ellie and pull her to safety. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how many distractions they have or how many sniper bullets Joel has. It's Kathleen and about 30 guys surrounding a man and 2 children. From the window, Joel can overhear the conversation. Henry offers himself up as long as Kathleen lets the kids go, but Kathleen says no. The girl was with the guy that killed Brian, and Sam's with you. Henry yells, "You don't understand what you're doing." And Kathleen says, "No, I do. I understand exactly what you did, but did you ever think that Sam was supposed to die? I mean, kids die, Henry." As Kathleen is lecturing Henry on how Sam isn't special, Henry turns to Ellie and says, "You take him and you run." He then stands up and offers himself up to Kathleen, and right before she's about to shoot him, that truck that had crashed into the house and exploded, it starts to creak, and then it disappears because the explosion ruptured the floor, and that opened up the ground, the same ground where all the infected were. And an absolute horde of them come running out of that house directly at Kathleen and all of her men. As Joel is watching this from the house, he's trying to see where Ellie, Henry, and Sam are to keep them safe. But that's when the big boy comes out of the ground, a bloater. It's like a clicker on steroids. I mean, this thing is huge. Imagine The Rock and Vin Diesel having a baby and it gets infected and grows up. It gets extremely dicey for everybody. Ellie, Henry, and Sam, they're all almost killed. They are eventually able to get away and run towards the house, but it's Kathleen who still has vengeance on her mind and yells, "Stop," with a gun in her hand. They have no choice but to stop. Right before she's about to pull the trigger, though, she gets attacked by an infected that tears her head off. It gives Henry, Ellie, and Sam an opportunity to get away. Joel joins them, and they get the hell out of there. They find a motel not too far away, and they decide to stay there for the night. Now that they've survived this together, Joel turns to Henry and says, "I don't know how I'm getting to Wyoming, but if you guys want to come with, you're more than welcome." And Henry can't take Joel up on that offer fast enough. But there's one problem. Sam hasn't told anybody, but he got bit. He reveals it to Ellie, and she tries to help out, cutting her hand and putting her blood on the wound, thinking that that would make a difference. But when she wakes up in the morning, she's attacked by Sam. He's now infected. The commotion of Ellie trying to hold Sam off gets into the room where Joel and Henry were sleeping, and it wakes them up. Joel dives for the gun, but Henry's able to get it first, and Henry has Joel at gunpoint. When Joel makes a move towards Sam, Henry shoots at his foot. It looks like Henry's about to let Sam just tear Ellie's face off, and then he shoots him in the head. When it finally sinks in at the realization of what he did, he turns the gun on himself. Ellie feels really bad about what happened, that she couldn't save Sam. But they can't dwell on it too long, because they have to continue to make their way out west. 3 months later, they've made it to Wyoming, but there's no sign of Tommy. To make things worse, they're completely lost. They went to Cody, but it was crawling with infected. They made a left when they should have made a right. They need to figure out where exactly they are. They find a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and they find a couple inside, and they ask them for directions. They have to do it at gunpoint. But the couple seems nice enough, and they give them the directions. But they also tell them that if they've made it this far, they probably know that the likelihood of Tommy being alive is slim to none. When Joel asks for some advice to go west, the man tells him, "Yeah, go east. Don't ever go past this river here," and he points to one on a map. While they've never seen who's out past the river, what they do see is the bodies that are left behind. They just know it's bad news. Joel isn't going to give up that easily. He leaves the house, starts to walk outside, but the realization that Tommy might be dead hits him pretty hard. He gets a chest pain. He chalks it up to the cold air, but it's not just that. The next day, they make their way towards the river. They see the bridge, but they don't see anybody, bodies or infected or anything. They get to the other side and still nothing. So they continue to walk. On their walk, they even come across a power plant, although Joel has no idea how it works. But not too long after that, they come across people. A lot of people. Intimidating. On horseback with guns. They surround Joel and Ellie. They tell them to drop their weapons. And then they check to make sure they're not infected. They don't have one of those fancy devices, but what they do have is a dog that's really, really good at it. Joel, of course, isn't infected. He doesn't have anything to worry about, but Joel doesn't know what's going to happen when this dog sniffs Ellie. I mean, technically she is infected, but she's immune. Joel's fears, though, wash away when he looks over and the dog is literally playing with Ellie. So the two are safe. Now that the group knows that Joel and Ellie aren't infected, they ask, all right, what are you doing out here? And Joel says, I'm just looking for my brother. That's when a woman comes forward and says, what's your name? And when Joel says his name, she recognizes it. The group escorts Joel and Ellie back to their town, and that's what it is. It is an absolute fortified town. They find themselves in the town of Jackson, Wyoming. And Joel is especially shocked because entering the gates, it's as if they have actually gone back to the way it was before. The only thing really missing is cars. Everybody's using horses. As they're taking it all in, Joel sees Tommy. Tommy rushes down, gives Joel a big hug, and the two brothers embrace. While Joel is thrilled to be here, Ellie not so much. She doesn't like the way how these people have handled things so far. The fact that they were ready to kill them, one, and the fact that upon entering the gates, they took Ellie's gun away from her. In a few months, Ellie's become pretty attached to the thing. Tommy tries to explain to her that they just have to be super careful about who they let in. As far as the bodies that are left around, those are the people that tried to mess with them. They do that to scare off other individuals. Joel asks the woman for a moment alone to talk to his brother. Just family. And that's when Tommy says, actually, her name's Maria, and she is family. We're married. It's a little awkward. Joel doesn't really know what to say, so Tommy breaks up the silence by saying, let's give you a tour. And they tour the small community. This place really has everything. They've got a school, they've got a movie theater, they've got electricity thanks to the dam. This place is the only place that they've found in their journey that actually works. Maria breaks down how the community works, and what it boils down to is they're a commune. Everybody works for the betterment of the community. When the question comes up of where Joel and Ellie can stay, that's already covered. They've got an empty house across the street. Hasn't been touched since '03. It didn't take long for Ellie to start warming up to this place, especially when she meets a horse named Shimmer. Maria takes Ellie over to the house to get acclimated, and Joel and Tommy are able to catch up. Tommy asks how Tess is, and Joel lies to him, saying she's fine. Tommy definitely doesn't buy Joel's story on who Ellie is. The story that Joel tells is she's a bigwig in the Firefly's daughter. She's trying to locate her family, and Joel just took it out of the goodness of his heart to escort her out here. Joel doesn't come clean, but he does tell Tommy, yeah, there's a payment involved. So, do you know where the Fireflies are? Tommy says that the Fireflies have a base at the University of Eastern Colorado. It's about a week's ride south, but it's a pretty rough stretch. Not one that anyone should take by themselves. Joel thinks that won't be an issue. Tommy can go with him, but Tommy says, nah, I can't go, man. That really pisses Joel off. He starts demanding answers from Tommy, why he stopped using the radio. And Tommy tells him that after he left the Fireflies, Maria and her people found him and they took him in. They didn't have to, but they did. And they're really protective of where they're located, so he just stopped communicating. But the real reason why he can't go is the fact that Maria's pregnant. Joel doesn't really handle this news well, and Tommy doesn't handle the fact that Joel doesn't take the news well. Sparks a bit of a fight between the two where Joel says, we'll just grab some supplies and be out of here in the morning. The conversation between Ellie and Maria is going way better than the Joel and Tommy one, though. Ellie was able to take a shower, get some clean clothes, and then she headed across the street to Tommy and Maria's. Maria gives her a new jacket that will help with the cold, and then even gives her a haircut. Ellie's pretty curious on how Maria started cutting hair, thinking that maybe that was her job, but Maria says, no, that was a mom thing. I was actually the assistant district attorney out of Omaha, Nebraska. Ellie figured that Maria lost some kids. There was a little memorial put up. So she apologizes for Maria's loss, but she's shocked to find out that the other name, Sarah, that wasn't Tommy's daughter, and it wasn't Maria's daughter either. It was Joel's daughter. In the months that they've been together, Joel never revealed to Ellie that he had a daughter. This is the first she's hearing of it. To Ellie, it actually explains a lot. Maria, though, is pretty concerned for Ellie. She's heard plenty of stories from Tommy about Joel, and she doesn't exactly know what's going on between Joel and Ellie, but she is concerned for the little girl's safety, knowing what kind of person Joel was. Ellie, though, comes to Joel's defense, because after spending all these months with him, she has a pretty good idea of who he is. Maria looks at Ellie and says, just be careful who you put your faith in, because the only people that can betray us are the ones we trust. The first chance she gets to get the hell out of that chair and get out of that conversation, Ellie does, going around town to just explore. When nightfall hits, she still hasn't seen Joel. Joel was doing a little exploring himself, but he was kind of hiding out in a tool shed, and Tommy finds him there and apologizes for the confrontation. Tommy, though, has the same questions that Maria had. What the hell are you doing with this little girl? And Joel comes clean that Ellie is immune. It's hard for Tommy to quite comprehend what he just heard, so he makes Joel tell him the story from the beginning. He keeps reliving the same nightmare with Sarah over and over again, and he feels like he's destined to relive it with Ellie. He wants Tommy to take Ellie and find the Fireflies, because he feels like if he does, he's just going to fail her. It takes a lot of convincing, but Tommy eventually gives in and agrees. That night, when Joel eventually comes home, Ellie can tell right away that Joel is planning on ditching her. Joel tries to defend himself, but Ellie ain't having it. She yells, "Do you care about me or not?" And Joel says, "Of course I do." Ellie shakes her head and just says, "I'm not her, you know." That was a line that Ellie probably shouldn't have crossed. She pisses off Joel so much that Joel says, "Get ready to go in the morning. We're done." This sparks a really big fight on loss. Joel feeling like Ellie has no idea what loss truly is. And Ellie feeling like she knows exactly what loss feels like because everybody she ever cared about either left her or is dead. But the Sarah line was just too painful. Joel reminds Ellie that this was a transaction, and at dawn, they're going their separate ways. When it comes time to actually do that, though, at dawn, Joel can't bring himself to do it. He's had a lot of time to think about it, and he feels like Ellie deserves a choice. But Ellie's already made her choice. She's not going with Tommy. She's going with Joel. Tommy gives Joel some tips, some directions, then gives him a hug and sends him on his way. 5 days later, they make it to the university, unscathed. It's completely abandoned. They don't see anybody. They search the campus looking for any sign of the Fireflies or anybody, but all they find is monkeys that are let loose. That's when they do see the Firefly insignia spray painted on a sign. They follow the directions and head indoors, but it's been abandoned. Joel finds a moving list, so he knows that they picked up and left, but he doesn't know where they went. When they go upstairs, though, they do find a map that seems to indicate everybody went to Salt Lake City. They're then spooked because they hear voices outside, and it looks like raiders. They try to sneak out of the building and get on their horse and get out of there before they're seen, but they're caught. Joel ends up killing the one guy, but not before he's stabbed pretty good. Joel is in really, really rough shape. Ellie has to ride Joel out of there and get to safety. For the first time, Ellie is super, super scared because Joel isn't responding. She's in the middle of nowhere, and she has no idea what to do. In episode 7, Ellie is able to get Joel to a neighborhood not too far away and get him inside a house. She's trying to keep him alive, but he's kind of clinging to life. He's conscious, he can talk, but when he does, he tells Ellie she's got to leave. Leave him behind. She's not willing to do that. Leaving somebody behind was something she had to do once before. When Ellie was growing up in Fedra school, she really just had one friend, Riley. But Riley left, and for 3 weeks, she never returned to the school. It seemed like she was gone forever. Not that Ellie really needed it, but Riley was sort of Ellie's protection at the school. Nobody would pick on Ellie because they knew that they had to deal with Riley. So when Riley left, life sort of became a living hell for Ellie. It wasn't like Ellie would just sit there and take it. She would fight back, but it would lead her to getting in trouble. Because of this, Ellie was pretty frustrated. But one night, Riley came back, sneaking back into the room and visiting her. After the initial, "where the hell have you been" kind of talk, Riley reveals to Ellie that she joined the Fireflies. Ellie is in complete shock about this. Everything they've been taught in Fedra school, the Fireflies are the worst of the worst. Now her best friend has joined them. And Riley says, "I will tell you everything, but you have to come with me for a couple hours tonight." Ellie quickly gets dressed, grabs some stuff, and the two sneak out of the window. They start having to sneak through abandoned buildings and alleyways to avoid detection. They do find some alcohol from a dead guy, so that's a win. The two get to a rooftop building, and that's when Ellie says, "All right, spill it. Why'd you join the Fireflies?" Riley explains that one night when Ellie was in the hole, she snuck out. She was on the way back when a woman popped out of nowhere and said she was impressed with the way that Riley could sneak around and avoid people. She then asked her, "What do you think of Fedra?" And Riley said that they suck. That's all it took. After that, Riley was a Firefly. Well, they both are on opposite sides of viewpoints here because Riley looks at herself like a freedom fighter and Ellie is still slightly Team Fedra. An argument never pops off between the two. They just continue to make their way through the QZ as Ellie follows Riley's lead. Riley leads Ellie to the mall. The mall has been closed for years. No one's supposed to go inside. Fedra shut that down. What Fedra doesn't know is when they recently turned on a power grid, turned on the power to the mall as well. When Ellie walks inside and Riley flips the switch, it's incredible. It's something that Ellie has never seen before. She's amazed. Ellie's a little concerned about infected or whether Fedra will see them, but Riley assures her that the place is clear and there's no way that Fedra's going to be able to see them. It's just them two in the mall alone. Things that we take for granted, like escalators, Ellie's amazed by. She's also amazed at what the people took from the stores. Foot Locker's cleared out. Bath & Body Works, that's chocked full. And Ellie's got a really good point because Bath & Body Works has some real quality stuff. Riley then leads Ellie to the carousel, something else that Ellie has never seen before. The two are all smiles as they go round and round, drinking that alcohol they found. But when the music stops, Ellie has a question for Riley that's been bothering her. She asks, "Did you leave because you really thought that you could liberate this place?" And Riley takes a little bit of offense to it, saying, "Don't say it like that. It has worked in other places. The Fireflies have actually set things right." And Ellie shoots back, "We could do that too if you come back. We're in Fedra school. We get jobs in Fedra. We change the way that it is." But that was never going to happen for Riley. She's slightly older than Ellie, and she already got her assignment. She was scheduled to do sewage detail. You're not exactly going to change things cleaning up shit. When she saw that, she panicked and ran, and the longer she was away, the harder it was to come back. Ellie does smile, though, when Riley says, "You were the one thing I missed from that place." They carry on with the tour. They go to a photo booth, take some photos, and then they get to the big one, the arcade. They go game to game having a blast, but the game that they love the most is Mortal Kombat 2. After playing for a bit, Ellie says, "It's getting late. I got to get back and be up in a couple hours." Riley doesn't want the night to end, but Ellie reassures her that she'll come back the next day. Before Ellie does head back to school, Riley has something to give her. They have to go over to the food court, though, to get it because that's where Riley's been staying. She's been sleeping in the mall. She found something that she thought that Ellie would really be interested in. It's another book of puns written by the same author. He wrote a sequel. As they're laughing at some of the horrible jokes inside, Ellie sees something out of the corner of her eye, and it's bomb-making material. It forces Riley to come clean that she didn't just stumble upon this place, she was stationed here. Riley tries to assure Ellie that she would never let the Fireflies use those bombs anywhere near her, but Ellie says, "Really? You think they'd listen to you?" Ellie gets so upset she starts walking away, but Riley stops her and says, "Wait, I have to tell you, I'm leaving. They're sending me away to a post in the Atlanta QZ. Tonight's my last night in Boston. I asked Marlene if you could come with me, but she said no." At this point, Ellie has no idea who Marlene is, but she doesn't care. This will be the last time she ever sees her best friend. Ellie is so upset about all of it, she storms off, but she stops herself right before she leaves the mall. She heads back and she starts hearing screaming. She gets really scared for her friend, but what she finds is Riley sitting inside a Halloween shop. The screams were just animatronics. The two start having a conversation where Ellie tries to convince Riley to stay, and Riley tries to convince Ellie that this is what she has to do. They don't want to have their last night together, though, be them two fighting. So they throw on some music, they throw on some Halloween masks to start having fun. But Ellie isn't willing to let this be their last night together. She pulls off her mask and tells Riley, "Don't go." And Riley looks in her eyes and says, "Okay." And then Ellie kisses her. As they're chuckling about the fact that they just shared their first kiss, an infected person walks in. Unbeknownst to them, there was an infected person in the mall the entire time, but it was laying dormant. The noise from the music alerted it to the fact that there were people there, and it starts chasing Riley and Ellie through the shop. Ellie is able to kill it, but then she notices that she was bit. And then Riley notices that she was also bit. That's when the panic really sets in. They decide to spend their last moments together, but of course Ellie is immune. Riley turned first, and Ellie was forced to kill her. Because of that, Ellie's not willing to let Joel just go. She finds a sewing kit in this abandoned house, stitches him up, and goes off to find help. In episode 8, using the hunting skills that Joel had shown her, she heads out and is able to kill a deer. When she eventually tracks it down, she's surprised because there are two guys standing over it. She's able to get the jump on him, and she has him at gunpoint, telling him, "Get away from it. It's mine." The two guys are from a local community nearby. It's a little bit of a religious cult. Their leader, David, is one of the guys standing over the deer. The community is really hard up for food, so they could absolutely use this thing. They're also going through a tough time because one of their own had just recently died. The ground is way too hard for them to dig to bury him. Conditions are really bad. There's snow everywhere. It's cold. Morale at this place is not great. In a nutshell, David needs a win. They introduce themselves to Ellie and say, "We're from a large community. We have women and children." And she cuts them off and says, "Yeah, well, I'm from a large community too. I have women and children, and we're hungry." David chuckles and says, "Well, that might be so, but you can't drag this thing back alone. Also, we're not looking for charity. We'll trade you." And Ellie jumps at that opportunity saying, "Well, do you have medicine?" And David's community does, in fact, have medicine. He sends his one guy back to go grab some. But it's going to be a bit, so it leaves both Ellie and David to hunker down and get acquainted better. He starts out by inviting her to his group, but she says, "Yeah, the Hunger Club? No, I'm okay." David's not discouraged, though, by Ellie's harsh nature. He explains that he's a preacher. 1 turned 2, turned into 3, so yeah, it is pretty religious, but it's also safe. Ironically, David actually got into religion after the pandemic hit. He starts giving Ellie his life story and finishes it off with, "Everything happens for a reason." And when she laughs at that, he says, "No, I'll prove it to you." And he says, "Okay, we didn't expect this winter to be so cruel. A couple of days ago, I sent 4 people to a nearby town to scavenge, see what they can come up with. Thing is, only 3 of them came back. And the one that didn't was a father. He had a daughter, about your age. But that guy was murdered by this crazy guy. And the thing is, that crazy guy was traveling with a girl. You see? Everything happens for a reason." This gets extremely tense for a few seconds. But David told this story because he saw that his partner had come back, and his partner gets the jump on Ellie. But to his partner's surprise, David doesn't take vengeance upon Ellie. He actually commands the guy to give Ellie the medicine. Ellie grabs it and gets the hell out of there, but the second command is pissed at David. Because he, like just about everybody in their community, wants vengeance. They want whoever did this to pay. And it certainly doesn't go over well when they get back, because the second command had told everybody what they found. They found a little girl that fit the description. So when they return with just the elk, and not Ellie or Joel's head on a spike, everybody's questioning David's leadership. He addresses the crowd and says, "Yes, we found a girl who was with the man who took Alex from us. At sunrise, I'll lead a group out, we'll track her down, and we'll bring that man to justice." One little girl speaks up, and she's the daughter of the guy who was killed. She says, "You should kill them. You should kill them both." And David walks over and slaps the crap out of her. He then helps her up and says, "I know you don't think you have a father anymore, but the truth is you always have a father, and you will show him respect when he's speaking." Of course, he's talking about himself, and it's pretty damn weird. And the thing is, nobody says a word about it. They just let it happen. Now, over with Ellie, it's also pretty tense, but for a different reason. Ellie rushes back and injects Joel with the medicine. Now it's just a waiting game to see if he gets better. She heads outside the next morning to go grab some ice to pack his wound, but then she hears something. When she goes to investigate, it's David and a group of his guys searching for her. David has instructed his men to kill Joel, but bring Ellie back in, a decision that's not really sitting well with any of them. As they search the neighborhood for Ellie, Ellie runs back in the house and puts a knife right into Joel's hand. He's kind of conscious, but not really. She instructs him, "Do not fall asleep. There are men coming, and I'm going to try to lead them away from you. But if anyone gets down here, you kill them. Do you understand?" She then does her best to barricade the basement, and she heads out, trying to create a diversion. She does a pretty decent job, but her horse does end up getting shot, and she ends up falling off of it. She's a little banged up and dazed, and the guys that are with David are going to defy his orders and kill her. That is, until David stops them. He picks her up, and he takes her back to their encampment, instructing the rest of them to continue to look for Joel. They go door to door until eventually Joel is found. But luckily, he gets a sudden burst of energy and he kills one of the guys. He starts stalking the rest of them until one by one he gets them and traps them. He tortures the one into giving up the location of where they took Ellie. And now it's just a matter of getting there. And Ellie was taken back to David's community. He had to lock her up, but he really wants to keep her alive, even though everybody else wants to kill her. And she doesn't seem all that grateful about this. At first, he is nice, patient, just like he has been this whole time, but eventually his patience does wear thin. He's getting frustrated at the fact that Ellie isn't really interested in warming up to him. David leaves the room and lets Ellie think about the situation that she finds herself in. As soon as he does, she just tries to escape. She's finding out escaping from this cage is going to be easier said than done, but then she sees something that is truly upsetting. It looks like a human ear and other pieces of flesh on the ground. This comes at a really bad time, too, because David brought her in food, but as soon as Ellie sees this, she completely loses her appetite. Ellie asks David, "Are you just going to chop me up into little pieces?" And he says, "I'd rather not. I understand if you want to judge me." And Ellie cuts him off and screams, "Judge you? You're eating people, you sick fug." David doesn't deny this. He tells her that there's only a few of them that know, but it is true. It was the last resort. But what was I supposed to do? Let them starve? These people that put their faith in me? David starts talking to Ellie about how the two are a lot alike. And Ellie starts to seem receptive to the idea of staying there with David. Then it just gets downright creepy, though, because David starts talking about the life that they could build together. He even goes so far as to caress the top of her hand. But that's when she shows her true intentions by grabbing his hand and breaking it. She tries to grab the keys from him, but she's unable to. All it does is piss him off and show his true nature. He leaves, and a little while later, he comes back with another guy, and they're planning on killing her. She begs them to stop, but David doesn't seem like he's going to. The only thing that gets him to stop is when she screams, "I'm infected." That's because David was bitten by Ellie. They roll up Ellie's sleeve, and they start looking at the wound and discussing if it's real, if it's not, and Ellie jumps into action, grabbing a meat cleaver and shoving it right in the guy's neck. David pulls out a gun and starts shooting at her, but she's already on the move trying to get the hell out of there. She doesn't even know that Joel has made his way to the property. He's also found where they're stashing all these bodies that they chop up and make brisket out of. In an effort to defend herself, Ellie grabs a piece of wood from the fire, and she's holding it waiting for David to come through the door. When he does, she chucks it at him, but she misses. The embers, though, light the building on fire, slowly. David, though, doesn't even seem to care about the fact that the building they're in is slowly going up in flames. All he's focused on is finding Ellie. He starts to hunt her. She's evading him the whole time, waiting to strike. And when she does, she stabs him right in the abdomen. While this wound hurts, it doesn't kill David, and he's able to throw Ellie down on the ground and start beating on her. He then gets on top of her, and it seems like he's about to rape her, but Ellie is able to grab the same meat cleaver that she had, and she starts bludgeoning him to death. She stumbles out of that building, blood all over her face, she's disoriented, and that's when Joel finds her. He can tell by looking at her that she has been through a lot these past few hours. She can't even get the words out to tell him what happened. She just gives him a giant hug. He tells her it's going to be all right, and the two make their way out west. And in the season finale, as they slowly make their way towards Salt Lake City, Joel is doing everything to cheer Ellie up. The normally chatty Ellie is short on words. It's clear that her mind is elsewhere. A couple hours later, they get to downtown Salt Lake. They're going to have to find a skyscraper, head up, and look around to find out where exactly they are. They find a building that's tall enough. They head inside. And when Ellie heads up, she yells, "Joel, you got to see this." Of course, Joel is thinking the worst. But when he heads up to see where Ellie is, he's shocked because she is a few feet away from a giraffe, chomping on some leaves. It must have escaped from the local zoo, and she's never seen anything like it. This is also the first time since they were back at the college that Ellie seems like her old self. The two of them start feeding the giraffe together, and Ellie is all smiles. When the giraffe walks away, they head up to the roof, and they see outside, and there's a bunch of giraffes. They've overtaken what looks to be an old baseball field. As they look around for where this hospital is, Joel has a sneaking suspicion that something bad's going to happen. And he has this suspicion because on their journey, something bad has happened every step of the way. He wants to give Ellie the option of going to this hospital. The other choice they have is turning around and going back to Jackson. Ellie thinks about it and says, "No. After all we've been through and everything I've done, it can't be for nothing. When we're done here, I'll follow you anywhere you go, but there's no halfway with this. We have to finish what we started." They make their way out into the street, and what they're really in is a Fedra medical pop-up. Joel tells Ellie that he was actually in one of these when he got shot. The same scar that he has on his head, they treated it in one of these. But then he reveals who the person was that shot him. It wasn't a shooter, it was him. He explains that after Sarah died, he just couldn't fathom living without her. So he tried to commit suicide. He flinched, gun went off. Ellie's really surprised about this. She had no idea, and she says, "Wow, I guess time heals all wounds, huh?" But Joel turns to her and says, "It wasn't time," looking her square in the eye. While he doesn't say it, they both know that the thing that filled the void in Joel's heart was Ellie. They continue to walk down the street, reading some of the jokes from the pun book, and then all of a sudden they trigger a bomb that goes off. They're pretty disoriented and they're scooped up. But it's not by raiders, it's by fireflies. They're dragged back to a hospital, and when Joel wakes up, the first question he has is, "Where's Ellie?" And it's Marlene who is standing there and lets him know that Ellie is fine. She didn't even have a scratch on her. It was Joel who was the one who was really messed up. Marlene is absolutely floored he made it this far. She says, "We lost half our crew traveling over here. How the hell did you guys make it?" Joel takes no credit for it, saying it was all Ellie. But Marlene knows that if it wasn't for Joel, she would have died a long time ago. She tells Joel that he was the one person she never wanted to be indebted to, but she really owes him. He doesn't care about any of that, though. He just wants to see her. And Marlene says, "I can't. She's being prepped for surgery." That's when Joel gets the bad news. Ellie's being prepped for surgery because their doctors believe the cure is in Ellie's brain. He's going to remove the cells in her brain, reproduce them, and then they have a cure. But this would mean Ellie making the ultimate sacrifice. Joel's stunned by this. He can't believe that Marlene is willing to sacrifice Ellie. He says find somebody else, but she says there is nobody else. "We didn't let her know about this. She won't feel any pain." But Joel gets even more pissed off hearing this. In a last-ditch effort, Joel says, "Please, you don't understand." And Marlene says, "No, I do. I was there when she was born, Joel." And that is a fact. Marlene was best friends with Ellie's mom. When Ellie's mom was just about to give birth, she was waiting on Marlene and the rest of the Fireflies to come get her. But she was attacked and bitten. Right before she turned, she gave birth to Ellie. So cordyceps was in the bloodstream. It's the whole reason why Ellie is immune. That knife that Ellie carries around, it's her mother's. Her mother's last dying wish was to Marlene, to take her in and make sure she would be safe. So Marlene doesn't make this decision just on a whim. This is difficult for her too, but she knows that she's doing it for the betterment of everybody. Joel, however, does not see it like that. Marlene knows this and knows he could be a distraction. So she has two henchmen escort Joel out, but he's not going quietly. He kills both of them, takes their gun, and slowly makes his way through the hospital, killing anyone in his path, until eventually he does get to the operating room. He gets to the doctor just before he's about to do the surgery, and he kills him, taking Ellie and heading to the parking garage. Ellie is completely unconscious when they get to a car that looks to be running, but he's stopped by Marlene. She has Joel and Ellie at gunpoint, and she says, "You can't keep her safe forever, no matter how hard you try. Eventually, she's going to die because she lives in a broken world that you could have saved." Joel nods and says, "Maybe, but it isn't for you to decide." And Marlene shoots back, "Or you." Even though he's holding Ellie, though, Joel also has a gun in his hand. Marlene can't see it, and he shoots her. He puts Ellie in the back of a car and then walks over to finish Marlene off. She begs him to stop, but he says, "You just come after her," and he shoots her. A couple hours later, when they're long gone from Salt Lake City, Ellie wakes up in the back of the car. She's pretty confused on what she's doing there. Joel lies to her. He tells her that they were running some tests on her, but also other people, and turns out there's a whole lot of people like her. Turns out there's about 12 people that are immune, but the doctors couldn't make anything work. Because of this, they've stopped looking for a cure. Joel drives and drives until eventually that car gives way, but it does die out in Wyoming. Now it's just a matter of walking to Jackson. After a little bit of a hike, they're just on the cusp. Before they go any further, Ellie has to get something off her chest. The first time she did kill someone. She tells Joel all about what happened with Riley and her. As Joel is trying to tell her, "That's not your fault," she cuts him off and says, "Swear to me that everything you said about the Fireflies is true." And Joel says, "I swear." The two then head off to forge a new life in Jackson. And that is the end of The Last of Us. Thank you so much for getting this point of the recap. I really appreciate it. Please consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. Hit thumbs up if you like this. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. I have a Patreon, I have merch, I have a bunch of ways that you guys can give me money. The one thing I don't want you to give me is nasty comments. Be nice in the comments section. Nasty comments make me feel bad. Let me know what you thought of this series. It's hard for me to imagine anyone not liking it, but if you didn't, let me know why. And I'll see you back here for Season 2.